first distinguished panel this morning, and it is my pleasure to call to the podium Jeremy Everett, Director of Texas Hunger Mission.
Thank you, Sarah. It is good to be with you here today. I tell you what, in 2009, we had our first preliminary meeting at the Baptist building here in Dallas to talk about what it would look like if we built a coalition to address hunger. I get weepy. And I did not dream that it would look like this. I'm grateful for the work that you've done. I do believe this is, in terms of a collective impact model, I believe this is the best work being done in the country. You all are very committed to your community, and your community is better off for it. We're very grateful to see the new USDA numbers that recently came out to show that we've had a significant decline in food insecurity nationwide, but particularly in a place like Texas. And we know it's not always easy to work on poverty issues in a place like Texas, but part of the reason that we've been able to see strength in food security here in Dallas and around the state is because of coalitions like yours that are working hard to address the issue day in and day out. I'm very pleased to be here at the Dallas Independent School District space. It's exciting for us to see the progress that we've been able to make in addressing child hunger here in the Dallas community, largely because of the work of the district. I know this number is not completely current, but the last number I saw is that we're serving almost 98,000 children 3 meals a day through DISD. Isn't that incredible? I was in San Antonio last week with 5 different superintendents of the different school districts there at an audience gathering similar to this, and I was able to tell them, Dallas has beat me, and we want you to catch up. And so I don't think they like that, but I'm hoping that was spurred them on. Well, in May of 2014, I got a phone call from Speaker Boehner's office asking if I would be willing to serve on the National Commission on Hunger. I didn't even know exactly what it was, and they began to tell me that through a congressional law that they were forming a National Commission on Hunger. It was going to be a bipartisan commission with 5 Republican nominees and 5 Democratic nominees. And over a period of about 2 years to be able to make recommendations to Congress, to the United States Department of Agriculture, and ultimately the President, to be able to figure out the best way that we can promote food security as a nation. I thought it was a prank call, and so I was wondering which one of my friends here now is called me. And but come to know it was a real thing, and I felt very honored to be able to be a part of it. I felt honored to be able to be on a commission with some incredible individuals who devoted their entire lives to this issue. Part of what we did is we wanted to travel the country and see the country for ourselves. We wanted to see food insecurity up close, and we wanted to see it in a bunch of different contexts. So we spent the better part of our second year together traveling around the country. 2 in particular events that stuck out to me. We're on a trip when we were in El Paso. We were in this El Paso community. We were visiting surrounding areas and colonias. And in one of the invited testimonies, a public health worker told us that in his work in the colonias on the Texas-Mexico border, that as a social worker and public health worker, they were going door to door, visiting households to see how families were doing and to see if they had any food at home. On one of their visits, they met with a woman, and they asked her if it would be okay if they could look in her refrigerator. She was lucky enough to have electricity in her small house, which many of our brothers and sisters who live in colonias do not have electricity or running water. She was fortunate enough, and she had a refrigerator, and so she took the public health worker over to the fridge, and she opened up the fridge, and all that was there were a bag of chicken bones. And the public health worker said, "Why do you have chicken bones in your fridge?" And she said, "This way, if my kids open up the refrigerator, they'll at least see that something's there. We can do better than that.
Yes, we can.
Well, on that same trip, we saw somebody doing something better than that. A young man named Jesus, who was running a summer meals program just outside of El Paso. The poverty there was rampant. In most of the school districts in that area, near the Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico border, all had food insecurity rates of over 90%. Almost 100% of the children were on the free introduced lunch program. And of course, like we see in many communities across the state of Texas and across the nation, when kids were out of school, they were missing a number of meals. So Jesus partnered with one of our business school faculty members because they wanted to figure out how to change the plight of those children during the summer months. And they decided they were going to work together and use business models to develop route optimization so that they could figure out how many kids they could possibly serve throughout the whole region, not just in their district. So Jesus employed their high school students, about 40 of their high school students. They worked in 2 shifts, and one shift would come in the morning. They would prepare the meals for the lunch shift, and then they would all get in pairs and get on the bus. They get on one bus, and then as the bus would come to a site, the bus driver would drop off the 2 high school students with a cooler or 2 coolers worth of food, and then go on to the next site and do the same thing until he was able to drop all of these high school students off at sites all across that region of Texas. Once he dropped everybody off, then it was time to go pick the others back up. So every site would be open for about 2 hours. They realized by doing so, they were able to reduce the amount of money that they were spending on transportation and increase accessibility of summer meal programs. Then, when the bus would pick everybody up and come back to the high school gymnasium, where the other shift was assembling meals, he would pick up the next group. And then they would do the same thing so that kids could have access to lunch and dinner. Jesus was feeding 4,000 children a day.
Wow.
4,000 children a day. So I'm not going to say this to Jesus, if I meet him sometime, but Jesus fed 5,000 people once. Jesus was doing 4,000 a day. Well, the commission was a phenomenal experience. I think one of the neat things about the commission is that we were committed to having a consensus report from the beginning, which was incredibly difficult. If there was any prophetic thing that we did in Washington, I think Audrey can attest to us, is that we were committed to that. And we were not going to publish a report that didn't have consensus recommendations. Now, to be honest, after those first couple of meetings, I thought we may only have 1 or 2 recommendations. I was a little bit surprised at the end that we had over 20 recommendations to be able to provide to the general public and the Congress. But part of the reason that we were able to do that is because of the great work of 2 of our commissioners that we have here today, Russ Sykes and Sherry Jameson. Sherry, I think, was the heart and soul of the commission. She was the kind member who was always willing to spend the extra time to get to know commission members. She impacted me in my life, and I think it was because she spent the time to cultivate trust with each one of us that she had a loud voice, that people wanted to hear what she had to say. Sherry's been involved with hunger issues for almost 30 years.
Wow.
She took over the new at the time, food bank of Northern Nevada in 1987. It was a tiny organization with a budget of $166,000 a year at that time. Joining now what is Feeding America in 1988, the organization was assigned a service area encompassing 13 Nevada counties and 8 California counties, encompassing 90,000 square miles, before the food bank even owned a truck. In a region with more dirt and sagebrush than people, there were also very few resources available to be able to address food insecurity. Under Sherry's leadership, the food bank was one of the earliest adopters of USDA nutrition programs. The summer lunch program was launched in 1991. They were the first food bank in the nation to use the CACFP program for after-school meals in 1995. They were one of the first food banks to conduct SNAP outreach in 2005 and the first to be allowed to do SNAP interviews for better access for clients. Sherry worked for decades at the state level to build partnerships and relationships of trust between nonprofits and state administrators, lobbying for categorical eligibility at the beginning of the recession, integrated eligibility determination, the establishment of a state plan to end hunger, and Nevada's first state food security council. She says her food bank is small by many standards, distributing about 15 million pounds of food annually with partner agencies and a wide network, all to establish the goal of ending hunger. The Food Bank of Northern Nevada was the Food Bank of the Year, recognized by Feeding America in 2013, and Sherry was honored with the prestigious John Van Hingel Award in 2015 for her leadership and service to the national network. Most recently, Sherry was thrilled that her food bank was selected to be one of the cohort of 5 food banks nationwide piloting the cross-sector collective impact initiative to solve hunger, funded by the John and Laura Arnold Foundation here in Texas. We're excited that she was excited to be able to be here with you to see all that you've done with this particular model so that she can take that knowledge base back with her when she goes to Nevada. We're glad to have Russell Sykes. Russ, is currently the director of the American Public Human Service Association, their Center for Employment and Economic Well-Being. In addition to his role with APHSA, Sykes is also a visiting fellow at the Rockefeller Center Institute for Government. Russ has worked as a consultant, a senior fellow at the Empire Center on Public Policy, a project of the Manhattan Institute. He also served from 2004 to 2011 as the Deputy Commissioner of New York State's Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, where he was responsible for operating programs and the policy direction of SNAP, of the LIHEAP program, the TANF program, and welfare work contracts. From 1984 to 2004, Russ was the Vice President of the Schuler Center for Analysis and Advocacy, and had a portfolio on hunger issues, low-income tax policy, child care and early education, and healthcare issues. He was also the architect of New York's EITC program, a program that we are jealous of here in Texas, and the founder of the Nutrition Consortium of New York State. Previously, Russ has worked as a field coordinator with the Food Research and Action Center and as a director for County and Community Nutrition Services in Adams County, Pennsylvania. If you all would welcome our 2 distinguished panelists with us today. Well, first, I wanted you to tell us a little bit about your background in anti-hunger work and why in the world, of all things, did you choose to address hunger. So, Sherry, why don't you start us off?
Well, I think you've read a lot about Jeremy. I started back with the Hunger Project many, many years ago, and in New England where I grew up, and that was the time when people in Ethiopia and many places in Africa were really suffering malnutrition and starvation, and it was all over the TV. And I think that's what captured my attention in the beginning. And then over, kind of transferring from where I grew up to my new home in Nevada back in the 80s, really realizing that we have way too much work to do at home. And that really captured my heart, and that's where I found myself. It's been an amazing experience.
Excellent. Now, Russ, you've had an experience that kind of runs the gamut. Tell us a little bit about that and how you got involved with Hunger initially.
Well, I was called my accidental career. I went to Gettysburg College and was very involved in the active war movement, the anti-war movement. told me that he could get me a job at the local community food and nutrition program, which is an old OEO program, and I've been doing this work ever since. Adams County, Pennsylvania is the home of Gettysburg, and so I remained there for about 7 years, running the local community food and nutrition program, which, as you said, ran the gamut from direct services to advocacy, and in the old days you had what was called a policy advisory committee under OEO, which meant, maximum feasible involvement of the poor. And so we did a lot of traveling in rural Pennsylvania to get people involved in helping their own lives. And so it was eye-awakening for me, and something that I always had a passion for subsequently. And one of my favorite T-shirts to this day is, those of you who know that Gettysburg is the site of a major Civil War battle. It says Gettysburg, a drinking town with a history problem.
That's great. That's great. It is interesting to think, when you think about the OEO and you think about the community action agencies that were birthed through that era, and the collective impact models that you see today, it's almost like we've come full circle. And we've recognized that there are a number of things that were working then, and then I think we all became specialists in a lot of ways and became very good in our own collective space, but forgot how to work together. And I think these collective impact strategies are beginning to bring us back together, as evidenced by this Dallas community. Well, tell me, how did you first hear about the commission and hear that you were being invited to be a part of it? And what was your initial reaction?
I was flabbergasted. I was telling Jeremy the story earlier. I have two people that I know that have the identical name, and I've been in communication with one of them, and thought she was returning my phone call, and it turned out that it was the state director for Senator Harry Reid, the Majority Leader's office, who was very urgently demanding whether would I be willing to work on this project. So I was pretty surprised, because with only 9 or 10 people on this commission, that we would be, that I would be selected. So I was excited. I was enthusiastic. I was humbled by being selected, and it was, for me, just a really tremendous opportunity to listen and learn and contribute from what had been given to me over the years, the knowledge that we had about what was possible.
I certainly think one of the strengths of the commission was we had all different sectors represented, from business leaders to practitioners and professors and physicians. It was, I think it was certainly incredible that we were able to learn from each other. Russ, you brought a lot of experience to the table, and probably have run the gamut in terms of your whole sector of work that you've been involved with as much as anybody. How did you hear about it?
Well, I, like you, thought it was a prank call as well. I had a call from Senator Mitch McConnell's office. You want me to move further to the right?
That's right. I told Russ he may need to be a little bit further off stage. Right.
And they had read a lot of my writings, both on SNAP and on TANF, on the EITC and other things like this. They comported to some degree with the senator's sense of what he wanted represented on the commission, and we went back and forth several times, and subsequently he asked me to serve, and I too was very, very honored. I found it to be an opportune kind of moment where I really hoped we could, as you said, sort of transcend the normal Washington inertia that happens in Congress too much, and that we could come together as well-intentioned and intentional people and put aside, personal and ideological issues and arrive at some conclusions, and we did. I think that's really terrific.
Well, we met for almost 2 years, and of course, we spent a lot of time in DC. And I remember the first meeting that we had was in the USDA building, and when I came back home, my family asked me, "How was it?" I said, "Well, it was like most committees that you serve on. There were 10 of us there, and we had 20 opinions apiece, and so we could have been in a Baptist church." And I said the only difference was the table was a national treasure, and so we couldn't put anything on. I said it was just it was amazing, and I think we were all a little bit kind of awestruck by some of those initial meetings. But we spent time together basically on a monthly basis. Sometimes we went more frequently, but then we also traveled around the country, of course, as I mentioned before. Now, I mentioned a couple of stories that were really impactful for me, but what were some experiences that you had that really impacted you, that have stuck with you?
Well, first of all, I was very impressed. I think it might have been our second meeting when we were allowed to put things on the table where we met then, which I believe was at Drexel's University, Washington, D.C. office, because our chair, one of our chairs was Marion Chilton from Drexel. The other was Robert Gore, who's now at the American Enterprise Institute. But we got down to task at that meeting. We went through this elaborate sort of small breakout groups, just jotting down ideas and then putting them up on a whiteboard on the walls and prioritizing them. And I came to have the feeling at that moment that we were going to actually accomplish something. So that's sort of an overview picture. As far as all of the traveling we did, let me just say I'll juxtapose two stories that to me were quite fascinating. And one of our hearings was in D.C., but it happened to be in Anacostia, which is across the river and one of several of the poorest wards in the district, and a place where many kids, the level of poverty in those wards is very high, and many kids have probably never even been into downtown DC, which is just sort of almost unbelievable when you're part of the city. But I was very impressed with the passion of the people that were trying to change the community. We saw some community garden programs. They had a wonderful summer feeding program that they launched. They built a new community library. It was an incredible resource, but they had a long uphill struggle. And hearing the stories when we had the actual hearing, both public and private witnesses at one of the supported housing areas there, really was very telling. And I juxtaposed that with our hearing in Portland, Maine, where we had the whole different side of the coin, very rural, abject, predominantly white poverty that was very prevalent. And transportation and just getting to services was an enormous issue, as I'm sure it is here in Texas. So those two are really important.
I think for me, the visit to the colonias was the most shocking and gripping visit that we had. And you talked a little bit about it. We visited with a number of different places, but and I think by the end of the trip that we took together, I can remember getting into the van and how silent we were because it was such a shocking experience. But I think the thing that came to me first was when we saw the poverty and the circumstances in which people live. I mean, I'd really never been to a place where there was no water, no sewer services, no electricity, and so forth and so on in my lifetime. And if this is the better life that people came for, what did they live like where they came from? And we heard of tremendous violence, domestic violence, drug violence, and so forth. The violence, particularly against women, that drove people to take the trip across the border and see what could become, what they could create. And then we heard that even though they were now in the United States, women experienced the same domestic and sexual violence they experienced in Mexico.
I do think because we knew who had nominated the different people at the table, it did seem like it took a couple of months for us to get past whether a comment was being made by a Democrat or a comment was being made by somebody who was appointed by a Republican, to be able to begin to really hear what it was that each other were trying to convey. One of the things that y'all reminded me is that I was talking to Grace Norman, who oversees our child hunger work for the state, on our way up here this morning from Waco. And, one of the things I didn't necessarily anticipate, most of my work has been working in the area of poverty in general, community organizing, economic development before taking on the Texas Hunger Initiative 8 years ago. And so certainly we know that largely people experience hunger or food insecurity because of poverty. But one of the things that I found interesting was the commonality of food insecurity across the country. Where in D.C. you have a higher minimum wage, but the cost of living was so high that people were experiencing food insecurity. Certainly the same was true on the West Coast. And down in South Texas, it was immigration status that was a common cause of food insecurity, but you go to different places, and there might be different root causes, but food insecurity seemed to be the result of almost all of them, and it was because people were choosing to make trade-offs. They knew, if I don't eat tonight, my lights can still stay on. Or if I don't buy food for the next couple of days, at least my car won't be repossessed and I won't lose my job because I can't get to work. And so the work that you're doing, I find that even though we started THI 8 years ago, we knew food insecurity was an issue we needed to address. I felt like I came back enlivened to say this is a critical underlying issue that seems to be profoundly impacting millions of Americans, and I certainly appreciate the efforts that y'all have taken both in private sector work, but then also in this particular role. Well, tell us a little bit about the process. So we know we had to develop consensus. We know that we traveled around the country and that we had way too many meetings. But tell us a little bit about the process in terms of how we began to move towards these 20 recommendations.
Well, for me, it was really about keeping up with input. We probably had 200 or 300 interviews, testimony, public testimony. We had a tremendous amount of research, so it was about reading about what we wanted to know, the things that we'd asked folks to research for us, and kind of integrating the testimony with what we were learning from the research side. But I think that for me, it was sometimes challenging to listen without interpreting or judging, and
I don't believe that. Not for Sherry.
No,
for Russ and I,
it's
certainly.
True.
Yeah.
Well, it's true, but it's interesting because I come from a family where everybody's right all the time. So my experience growing up was trying to convince people to admit they're wrong and take your opinion. So that was very not successful most of the time. But I think one of the things that I took away from that experience is that at the end of the day, each of us was right from our perspective. We're justified in our opinions based on what we knew, and so it was learning how to really hold that in a respectful way, and to be able to negotiate and be able to speak more clearly the truth that we have, so that people can respectfully hear what we have to say as well. And I think that's one of the things that we all see is missing at this particular moment. I think there's talking and then there's a wall that it's going to, and it's just, there's no dialogue. So the ability to have that kind of a dialogue and be respectful and come to a decision and a conclusion that we could all agree upon was really important. And we began with that, as Russ alluded to, and we finished with that. And that's, to me, the success that we had was being able to bring something that was meaningful regardless. As they always say, a great agreement is one where everybody's a little bit on that.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Well, then we succeeded. That's right. Russ?
Well, the process, as Sherry said, was incredibly intense and rigorous and fascinating. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of commitment. I look at this, a lot of this through a different lens because I've done far more than just work on staff and nutrition programs. I've done a lot of work in writing on Medicaid, employment, and a host of other things. And so the lens that I look at this through is I'm very glad we addressed some issues, not only about what is systemically wrong that leads to whether it be child care, housing, many other issues that lead to poverty, but we did have a very tough discussion about people's own responsibility as well. And from the Ron Haskins school of thinking, who's now at Brookings, but for those of you who don't know him or know his name, he was the architect of the 1996 Welfare Reform Bill, and he will admit that there are aspects of it that were very flawed, but he also thinks that there are aspects of it that were true. And on the issue of individual acceptance of their role in things, he suggested always three things. They won't necessarily always answer things, but the three things are work if you can, avoid having children out of wedlock, and marry. Now, that's not for everyone, and it's controversial, but the fact of the matter is, when you look at what we looked at, the statistics for single-parent mothers and children on food insecurity are startlingly higher than they are for intact families. The issues of the issues of being on TANF in any particular state, yes, you're automatically and categorically eligible for food stamps, but you're designed to, in some states, the monthly benefit is $160, $175. In New York, it's $700. But I think what's really key in the takeaway from this is we need to look at the issue of employment and opportunity for people, and that's an area that is very near and dear to my heart, and that's what I'm doing now, and so I've written about a lot. With that, just related to SNAP, I'm delighted that FNS has taken seriously on their own as part of our recommendation to really expand their efforts in the SNAP employment and training area. Because right now we have a huge opportunity. The Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act that passed 2 years ago, for the first time, tries to really align 6 different employment and training kind of avenues, including TANF, including the Department of Labor programs, including both rehab, including SNAP E&T, under one umbrella with common performance measures. So to me, the context of our recommendations around the nutrition programs needs to fit into that bigger prescription, as Sherry said, and I think that, my biggest concern, and we'll get to this question, is I really wish the report had been more widely hailed and published and shared, because I think it represents a true bipartisan consensus that is not only hard to arrive at, but is probably the only way to make realistic change in this kind of political environment that we have now.
Well,
at the end of the day, the best answer for anybody that's hungry is a job that pays a decent wage. That's the bottom line.
Well, after hearing about 200 testimonies, both public testimonies and testimonies that we individually asked to receive and reading and learning about the history of federal nutrition programs, and then reading all the current research that's been made available, what recommendations that finally ended up being published in our report? In the report, you can go to our website, texashunger.org, and there's a link to the report if you have not been able to see it. But Russ, what 1 or 2 policies or recommendations are you most proud of that ended up in the final report, and that you feel like might have the most positive impact?
I think a couple of them on the SNAP side were very important to me. I already mentioned the expansion of employment training, but 2 others. I think I became very convinced through our process that the summer food program is very important, and that there are areas that for climate, geographic distance, so many other things really are faced with difficulties trying to get kids collectively at one spot. So I think we all came to a unanimous agreement to expand and scale up the summer EBT program, which I think is very important, which adds some benefits to the allotment over the summer to help families purchase more food. I think that we suggested a number of pilot programs. I know that many people have, and maybe that word sounds like, oh, God, one more pilot program, but the fact of the matter is, we've talked many times about whether the basis for SNAP benefits is sufficient. It's a 35, 40-year-old thrifty food plan that can sort of a stopgap diet. And one of the things we've suggested is to explore operating a pilot where you could contrast with a rigorously evaluated program that food plan as the basis for benefits with a higher food plan, perhaps the low-cost food plan, or somewhere in between the two, and evaluate it. Similarly, should we expand the earnings exclusion for working families, which for whom SNAP is not only a nutritional supplement, but a work support, to be quite candid. And so I think that's one that will be very controversial, but that's very important to me, is I have long had an interest in public health. And public health is a huge issue in this country, particularly with issues like childhood obesity, the onset of juvenile diabetes and adult diabetes, and I think we have to, like it or not, and I think one of the Commission's recommendations is that we should limit the ability to use food stamps, SNAP, to purchase sugar-sweetened beverages. When you do the overlay of maps in certain geographic areas, and I'll use the area of several areas of New York, the consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages contrasted in those areas to the incidence of obesity and childhood diabetes is absolutely staggering. And not only is that bad for people on the SNAP program, and I know all respect to the gentleman from PepsiCo, because I know they do great stuff. But I think
Matt, we are appreciative of you sponsoring something.
But what I will say about this, there was never any intent in what we proposed in New York and how several other states have proposed to say that people couldn't buy those things. We just should not be supporting the purchase of those beverages with public funds that wind up. And so the fact of the matter is we would learn from restricting their purchase whether people simply substitute their own dollars and nothing really changes, or whether they don't and whether it really reduces consumption. So, it's amazing the alignment of public health organizations who support this, and I'm delighted that the Commission bit the bullet and decided that this was equally important, because I know it's a difficult issue for many about choice versus reality and treatment in a store like everyone else. But it's an important point, and it's a big medical issue, and it's a huge cost to Medicaid.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the sensitivity in which you brought it up to the Commission, and knowing how important that was to you. What about you, Sherry?
I think for me, the child nutrition recommendations were amongst the most important. Summer EBT is such a huge answer. I live in a very rural state, and a state which, like many in the South, has not in the north where I live, but in the South in Las Vegas. The heat in the summertime is 105, 110, 116 degrees, and then the issue of safety. That summer EBT program, from my perspective, is a really sound answer for many of the issues that cause the summer lunch program to be not quite as successful as we would like to have it be. So seeing those recommendations in writing was really, I was really glad that they were part of the recommendations that we made. And I think if you look at what's possible, the 19th and 20th recommendations that we had for cross-agency collaboration at the federal level, and I would add on to that cross-agency collaboration at the state level, so to take that federal ground down to the state, and the establishment of a White House Leadership Council to End Hunger with a similar organization at the state level are probably amongst the two most important. If we can make that happen the way we did on the White House Council on Homelessness, and integrate. One of the things that we heard, that we all heard, was how much lack of coordination there exists with across various programs that are doing the exact same thing. There's probably 42 workforce development programs run by a number of agencies in Washington, and it just they're not working together. And when you have folks that are challenged with resources, they may know one line to go stand in, but they mostly don't know 17 lines. And if the one line that they stand in can't help, oftentimes you don't hear that, well, gee, I can't help you, but go talk to so-and-so, with this organization. So I think that if we can get that established, a national council to end hunger, and really push that down to the state level so we can deal with some of these things in policy, that's one of the most important things that we can do.
Yeah, that's great.
I just quickly weigh in and comment on one thing Sherry said. My good friend Audrey knows this, is that there is a new, somewhat heartening sense of, particularly with the advent of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, of collaboration between federal agencies, but ultimately the success of that is going to have to be on the ground. And then the other issue is systems, the delivery systems that actually, the cross-pollination between the Medicaid and the SNAP population is, as close to 100% as you can get almost in most places. And we just should be smarter about how we deliver benefits. I don't care what platform you build a system on, but don't make clients, as you said, go through 5 different doors to get benefits that are, for which there are similar eligibility requirements, basically. And so, I think with the advent of the Affordable Care Act, whatever happens to it in the future, but Medicaid is the 600-pound gorilla. And frankly, if you're going to build a system, you probably should build it on a Medicaid platform and deliver benefits for SNAP and for many other programs like that. And so I think that, the the use of increased federal funding for systems integration is also extremely important. And so maybe it's off topic, but it's really not. Because that's how people access the program.
Right. Yeah. Well, and to that point, I think for me, one of the most impactful recommendations that we made was about public and private partnerships.
Right.
And you look at this room. So this room is representative of public and private partnerships. You have the corporate sector, the nonprofit sector, faith communities. You have elected officials, you name it, school districts. You're all in the room together. And because of that model, we've seen an increase of over 2,000 summer meal sites in Texas.
Wow.
We have 1,400 community partner organizations working with Health and Human Service Commission to provide that integrated online application that Russ is speaking about. You're working on healthy food access. You're working on senior hunger. You're working on the entire gamut. To me, that is of critical importance, and that's one of the things that we highlighted. And we're excited that to see the USDA and their hunger-free communities model is I think beginning to catch up. Now, hopefully, they'll catch up, and Congress will allow them to resource community groups like you all, so that you can have strong backbone organizations to begin to continue to further work of addressing food security locally. Well, we have a few questions from the audience, and I want to shift gears a little bit. So, one of our first question: you began the work with the commission with our 20 opinions each. Can you tell each of us about one of your opinions that changed as a result of the process? Not to say that we're going to admit that we actually changed our minds, but this is fairly influential.
I'll admit, I will say that I was skeptical at first about the summer youth program. To be candid, both from a scalability, from a cost, but I think you have to weigh that against need, and if kids are really not getting meals in the summer because the school meals programs are closed and sponsorship is difficult, all the other matters we know. I had fellow skeptics, but came around on that issue because I think it's very important, and I think it's a novel program, and so I changed my mind.
Excellent.
I think the thing that I probably had gained more insight about was SNAP employment and training, and listening to Russ and Robert and the passion with which they really addressed work as a solution. Of course, I know work is a solution, but I also know the degree to which employment and training through SNAP was dysfunctional in the state of Nevada, and so I think that's one of the things that I came to realize that it didn't have to be the way it is, and there's some possibilities to make it work better that would make it work better for the people it's trying to serve.
Well, I was just glad that y'all changed your minds and began to realize that I was right at the end. So that was a success. So we did have an opportunity to spend a good bit of time in D.C., and of course, with a lot of our work and a lot of the other commissioners, we already spent a good bit of time in D.C. So one of the things, historically, hunger has been a bipartisan issue. And as you know, many of you know, THI is really a poverty platform. When we created it, we were instructed to develop a model to address hunger that we could replicate to other poverty issues. And to the colleagues that Audrey works with the USDA, that asked us to develop a model that we could replicate to other states. But quickly, hunger was no longer a bipartisan issue, and it seemed like Congress was getting further and further apart, not just on issues of national security and poverty in general, but certainly on food security. Why, and through our experience as commissioners, why do you think we can't see Congress come to consensus on some of these recommendations around food security?
Oh my gosh, it's really about people being right and not allowing that there is a middle ground. In my very humble opinion, you just, if it's about ideology, ideology really doesn't allow for consensus very much, and that's what I would say.
Yeah. Okay. What about you, Russ?
It's the same. The inertia comes from the huge ideological divides where the individual becomes more important than the goal, and the party, and being correct becomes more important than the solution. And you know, it's not to disparage. I would certainly not want to be a member of Congress. It's a very arduous, difficult job. But I mean, the era of statesmanship seems to be over, where people like a Bob Dole would cross the line to, you know, someone else. And I think that's a shame for the American people, not just for our issues, whether they be hunger or any other issue. I just think we can't allow, as voters, for this to continue, because there's no solutions to anything if people put themselves ahead of some common goals.
That's right. Frank Wolf, and Congressman from Virginia, Republican, Congressman for about 30 years, and Tony Hall, who was a Congressman from Ohio, Democrat for about 20 years, will be on campus in a couple of weeks to talk about their bipartisan work. Of course, they were champions in Congress for people that were experiencing hunger, both domestically and globally. Frank Wolf was actually, Congressman Wolf was the originator of the legislation that enacted the commission as one of his last legislative acts in Congress. And so we certainly miss people that were willing to rise beyond politics and become statespeople on behalf of all of us that are living here in the United States. Well, last question is simply, what's something that you want to leave the audience with? What's something that you feel like is important from your experience on the commission that you have this captive audience that you want them to walk away with?
Just be resilient and persuasive in your work. I mean, the work is, I've learned over the years, not only for me, having been around 42 years in this field, but a lot of things become repetitious. A lot of things become like, geez, I want to say I've been there, done that. But you know, I think really we're on the right side of the issues here, regardless which party or any party we represent. It's sort of funny. I didn't know that you got 2 Republicans and an independent up here. Appointees. So, I mean, you got to be resilient. You got to step up to the plate every time. You got to do exactly what you're doing here in Texas, which is like a stunning example, not only in Dallas, but statewide, of really bringing together disparate parties to try to find some common goals. And perhaps one day that will wear off on our elected officials.
I think understanding what's possible is really important, and believing that things are possible, and learning how to articulate your own thoughts and listen to other people so that you can to begin to build that consensus. I mean, it's through listening that that is really the pathway, and nobody's listening to each other anymore. So for me, that was the big takeaway, and for folks here, you just have to be persistent. After 10 years of advocacy in Nevada, we finally passed legislation, which was vetoed by our governor 2 sessions ago. We only meet every 2 years, and then signed by him in this last session. The mandate is breakfast after the bell in all schools that are 70% free and reduced and above, and probably will go down to 60% free and reduced. So there's opportunity, but man, you can't stop talking. That's right. And you'll get where you need to go eventually. But being able to communicate from the heart rather than just from your mind is crucial.
I think that's practicality and patience is what you just said. And I always quote
2 words, and I took 20. Right?
No, but I always quote Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was, and he always said that the best is the enemy of the good.
Right.
So we understand that change is incremental and understand that it takes time.
Well, Russ and Sherry, it is always a pleasure to be with you. I'm grateful to the coalition here for getting the gang back together and being able to spend time with you. Let's all thank them for their